I want to make sure you understand the seriousness of the financial crisis that the federal government is heading towards. All right? On this sheet, you'll see a timeline. 2019 Social Security, starting on the left, surpasses $1 trillion annually in the budget. That is a budgetary burden for just Social Security is going to be 1/4 of the current federal budget. Next on the timeline, 2025, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, the multi-employer trust fund, will be depleted. Insufficient to pay full benefits to insolvent plans. 2026, Medicare spending and Medicaid, state and federal spending each surpass $1 trillion annually. 2026, Medicare Hospital Insurance Trust Fund will be depleted. The funds remaining will only be sufficient to pay 91% of hospital-related Medicare spending. 2029, defense annual spending will be estimated at $771 billion. Net interest spending will surpass in 2030 $1 trillion annually. 2034, Social Security, Old Age, and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund will be depleted, sufficient to pay only 77% of scheduled benefits. This is not every single federal program. These are just the ones on this particular sheet. Now that should make us all pause. Democrat, Republican, Independent. This should be an issue that is of concern to you, that our federal government is heading for a fiscal cliff. Doesn't matter who's in charge. Just in the last 20 years, we've seen a turnover of authority in the federal government from Republican to Democrat to Republican to Democrat. Congress has changed hands several times. And yet, these problems remain, are getting worse, and they will take the states with them. This is an important matter. This should be a bipartisan concern to everyone in the room here. Because what we're doing is passing on a problem by not acting. We pass along a problem to our children and our grandchildren. The longer we wait to resolve these kind of issues, the more critical the problem will become and the more devastating to our nation. Number 3, the third point I'd like to make is, even though this is called the Convention of States, I'd like you to consider it more of an intervention of the states. Other people call it this. An intervention of the states. We have a federal government that is addicted to spending your money. And it's not just addicted to spending your money, it's addicted to spending the next generation's money. The current debt of the federal government is $22 trillion. That's the on-budget accounted for debt. Future liabilities for the federal government, all the pension plans, all of the promises the federal government has made, are over $100 trillion. Put that in perspective. The current on-budget debt that we admit to, that is currently funded with those large interest payments, $22 trillion. The other unfunded debts for which there is no plan in Washington, D.C. to pay for. There is no plan in D.C. The Democrats do not have one. The Republicans do not have one. But the madcap spending continues. The unfunded liabilities are $100 trillion. We have to act, just like you would act if you had a family member who was addicted to opioids and they were getting themselves further in trouble in a bad way, jeopardizing their future and the future of their other family members. What would you do? You would be compelled to intervene, to do an intervention. Thankfully, the states can be the adults in the room when it comes to fiscal responsibility. And through the Convention of States, we can, if we get 34 states to agree to the application, insist that there be some restraints budgetarily put on the federal government. I don't think anybody in this room thinks the federal government is going to self-regulate on that matter. Again, it doesn't matter who's in control. Republican Party, Democrat Party. The crazy spending continues and goes on and on and on. So it's time for an intervention with the federal government, and the Convention of the States is a methodology that our founders put in place in the Constitution for such a time as this. And lastly, in my comments right now, by having this discussion about whether or not North Carolina should pass an application to request a Convention of the States be held to constrain the powers of the federal government, we get to engage in this wonderful national, state, and local conversation about the very essentials of government. It's a long overdue conversation that we have yet to have in our nation. We get close to it during the election years, but there's all the hype of politics and campaigns, and the really important issues kind of get sidelined to who has the best commercials, who's the most photogenic, things like that. But this is our time. This is our opportunity to have a necessary conversation of what do you believe should be the role of government in your life. Should the government be running up an exorbitant tab that they cannot pay this year and are going to pass on to your children, an embarrassing and a murderous debt that will impede their ability to succeed and enjoy the opportunities that we have today? So we get to have this wonderful national civics lesson. Conversation on government. What is federalism? Should there really be shared power between the federal government and the state governments? Separation of powers. Why is that a good idea? Why should we keep the executive here, the legislature here, and the judicial branch here? Checks and balances. You know, the states, by design, are supposed to be a check and a balance on an out-of-control federal government. And the best means to do that, the most peaceable means to do that, is through the Convention of States. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to try to take any questions that people might have.
Okay. Would you like to hear from the public first, or would you like to first?
Now let's take comments or questions from committee members.
Do we have any questions for the bill sponsor? Representative Ager.
Yeah. So when I meet with all the people coming to my office and coming to my home back in Buncombe County, they talk about, you know, the worry is an out-of-control convention of states. That's obviously something that comes up all the time. What I don't see in this, I mean, what you hear is term limits, balanced budget, but I don't see, besides just the whereases up here, that there's much of a guardrail on what this convention of states can actually face. The one constitutional convention we had before, thankfully, went way beyond its calling and created the Constitution. That turned out to be a great thing. But I would worry that in this case, that the guardrails aren't as clear as they should be.
Thank you, Representative Baker. It's a good question. It's one I've been asked many times. And first of all, I would direct you to Section 1 in the actual resolution itself. And you'll see where the legislature of the state of North Carolina hereby applies to Congress under the provisions of Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States for calling of a convention of the states limited to proposing amendments to the United States Constitution that, 1, impose fiscal restraints upon the federal government, 2, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and 3, limit the terms of office for its officials and for members of Congress. Now, let's say we get to 34 states and a convention is called, and pick your worst fear. Representative Baker, what would be the worst amendment you think could come out of a convention of states? What would be the thing that would scare you the most?
Welcome to the TMC.
Boy,
You may answer.
I don't know.
I'll pick one. Let's say freedom of religion, freedom of speech. That somehow the 50 states that meet in convention pass an amendment that says the First Amendment is no longer valid. We throw it away. All right. Does it become an amendment at that point to the Constitution? No. It has to pass 38 other states before it gets added to the Constitution. Now, this is a tremendous safeguard. Think about that. In our nation right now today, there are 99 state legislatures. 99. 49 states have bicameral like we do, a House and a Senate, and then there's old Nebraska out there just has one body. Sometimes, as a House member, I think that's a pretty good idea when I have bills that go to the Senate and stop. Maybe we should do a unicameral legislature. But there's 99 different bodies. So here's all it takes to stop a bad idea. Take the worst idea you have in your mind. Second Amendment, First Amendment, 10th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment. 17th. Is jeopardized by a convention. They come out with a bill that does away with it. Well, all it takes is 13 individual state legislatures. That's 13 judiciary chairmen in the House or the Senate. That's 13 speakers of the House who refuse to hear it. That's 13 presidents of the Senate that won't take it up. That's a hard, high bar that anything has to get across. My concern is that whatever we pass out of a convention of the states that might, say, put a balanced budget in place, it might be hard to get 38 states to agree with a good idea. But all it takes, friends, is 13 states out of 50, one legislative body in any of those 13 combined that says, no, we're not going to do this, and it stops. So that's a tremendous safeguard, I think. It's going to be very difficult to get a bad idea accepted by 38 state legislatures. Okay, so that's the constraint. Other is, this call, this has been repeated by 15 other states. Currently on record, there are 400 applications for a convention of states on record in Washington, D.C. Well, why haven't we had a convention of states yet? If it's only 34 states required and there's 400 different applications pending, what's the holdup? The holdup is they don't agree on the same topic. And they have to agree on the same topic. It has to be 34 agreeable, same language. That's why, a couple of years ago, we got to within 32 states asking for a balanced budget amendment. There's actually been about 60 balanced budget requests by application. But we've never had the convention of states with the 34 because we never had 34 same language, same purpose conventions. That's what's really good, I think, about this convention of states project. It's the same language everybody is accepting, and it's very limiting to the federal government as to what can be done. So I hope I've answered your question, Representative.
Yeah. Thank you. Maybe one quick follow-up. I would be more excited about it if we were ending the gerrymander or overturning Citizens United. That speaks to your point.
Right.
The problem is agreeing on what gets brought up.
You're right. Thank you. There have been applications along those lines, but not close to 34 yet. Now, again, we have 15 states that have accepted this. We could be number 16. That would get us halfway to the call. Here's what I think might happen, if I could prognosticate a little bit. Back in the early 1900s, there was a desire to replace the appointment of United States senators from the legislative bodies of the states, which is how it was originally, to by popular vote, which it is now. Okay. There was actually a convention of states movement to do that. And they came to within, I think it was 4 applications, and then Congress got the message and decided to act and introduce themselves I think it was 16th Amendment, I think? 17th Amendment.
I brought it up.
Okay, thank you. The 17th Amendment that changed how U.S. senators would be selected. So I think if we get close, Congress would probably act. I think they'd be afraid. They'd want to get out, Congress is, they want to get out in front of the parade. And they want to lead the way. So nothing happens, though, unless they feel the heat. And the only heat we have, I think, constructively, is a convention of states. Thank you.
Representative Kidwell.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I do not have a question. I have some comments if this would be the appropriate time.
We do have a few people speaking in the audience. And this seems like the appropriate time to hear from the public that have asked to speak. I've got Robert Caldwell. I'm going to give you 3 minutes.
Thank you, Representatives. I'm Robert Caldwell from Wake Forest. I'm a common Joe citizen. I became interested in the Convention of States because of my children and grandchildren. I was concerned about how the federal government is broken, and what would I say to my children and grandchildren if this continued? Did I do nothing, or did I stand up and do something? So I, as a citizen, am in agreement to invoke Article 5 of the Constitution to make amendments as agreed to upon by the states, and I signed the petition, and I'm part of the Convention of the States. I'm 62 years old. I shake because I have Parkinson's. I'm not afraid of any man or woman except my wife. I just wanted to say that the final way I made this decision is because in the center is conventions of states, and there's a lot of noise around it, for and against, right and left, are all for and against. And the way I made up my mind was normally people think of wisdom as being the highest, but the highest is actually discernment, spiritual discernment. So I prayed about it and thought about it, and in my discernment, I discerned that the Convention of States is a proper way to go. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up, I have Wynn Coleman.
Thank you, Chairman Brody, Riddell, Yarborough, and members of the committee.
Please state your name
I
and
will.
address.
I'm ready to right now. I just wanted to give my greetings. I am Wynn Coleman. I'm the chair of No Convention of States, North Carolina, a nonpartisan grassroots committee that is opposed to the Convention of States, and we don't take a dime of money. We're grassroots citizens. A genuine Article 5 convention and a so-called Convention of States is a nonpartisan issue that affects all Americans. There are many conservatives and liberals who are opposed. Most Americans have never even heard of a Convention of States. Convention of States project is selling their solution for limiting an out-of-control federal government as being the patriotic thing to do because things are so bad we must do something. Yet Daniel Webster, a great patriot, said, "A strong conviction that something must be done is the parent of many bad measures." First and foremost, under Article 5, there isn't any such thing as an Article 5 Convention of States, even though a similar term was used in 1787 and in early times. An Article 5 Convention is neither conducted nor controlled by the states. It is not found in Article 5 that delegates will be state legislators. Article 5 is deliberately vague. Why is that? Because Article 5, the constitutional conventions, are the government-making assemblies of free citizens. Why does Article 5 lack instructions for future conventions? Because no sitting convention can dictate to the next convention. Today's convention cannot establish procedures for tomorrow's convention. The founders understood this. The Convention of States supporters will tell you that a Convention of States can control the convention, so it will not be what is known as a runaway convention, yet the founders exceeded their mandate. So in one sense it could be not termed a runaway convention, but in another sense they have the authority to make new government. I'll skip to the part I want to emphasize. Convention of States supporters hang their hat on the argument that we do not have to worry that 38 states wouldn't ratify any crazy amendments. That's not true. In general, because of the sovereign authority of the people and the delegates, they can make entirely new rules, propose all types of amendments, and even create an entirely new constitution. Subjects cannot be limited, and you can't limit it to one amendment. If you don't think that can happen again, think again. There are other constitutions in the wings pre-written by left and right to submit at a convention. There are solutions. If you just indulge me with solutions, people always want those. Congress has the power of the purse. We can return to obeying the restrictions on the judiciary that are in the Constitution. And let's face it, there are other solutions left at the states, but the states are also complicit in the situation we are in today. I can supply a number of solutions that a constitutional attorney and lawyer has given to me, and I'd be glad to supply them to anyone by email if they're interested.
Thank you, Mrs. Wynn. We're now honored to have former U.S. Senator Tom Coburn like to speak to the committee.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm former U.S. Senator Tom Coburn. I'm a physician by training and practice over 35 years. I'm interested in this because I left Congress 2 years early because I don't see a way Congress is ever going to fix the real problems of our country. And the only way they are is when we make them have to make hard choices. They're not making hard choices now, no matter who is in control. It doesn't matter who's in control. And all you have to do is quote Mick Mulvaney, former head of the OBM and OPM, and also the president's chief of staff. Nobody in Washington cares about that. Well, the fact is Representative Riddell actually understated. We have $144 trillion of unfunded liabilities right now. If you have a millennial, over the next 50 years, that will impact their standard of living by $30,000 per millennial. If they marry a millennial, that'll be $60,000. That's just $6,000 than the median family income in this country. So what's going to happen? What's going to happen is the government's going to print money. And we're going to have inflation, we're going to debase our currency, and we're going to be just like the Weimar Republic. So if you don't believe that, look at the bid-to-cover ratio on U.S. debt. It was 3.8 10 years ago. It's 1.6 today. So the demand for our debt, the confidence in our country is declining. You have the power to fix that. You were designated to be the most powerful legislative body in the country as a state legislator. Not Congress, you all. What we've heard today and what I just heard is factually incorrect. The original Constitutional Convention, only one member from Massachusetts did not follow their commission. There was no runaway. They did exactly what they were told to do. It's documented. It's history. There's a book out called The Law of Article 5. I suggest if you have any questions, you might read that, because we had 12 conventions prior to the Constitutional Convention. We've had 21 interstate since then. Not one has not followed the directions of their state legislature. So the fact is we have a republic if we can keep it. We no longer have virtue, limited government, economic freedom, and rule of law. All you have to do is look around you to see it. If we're to restore those things, you will have to force Congress to make hard choices. Now they make politically expedient choices. Both parties. It's about, once I get there, how do I stay there? It's not about how do I do the best thing for our country. Let me give you one last quote. When you're sworn into the U.S. Congress, Senate or House, your state's never mentioned. Because your focus is supposed to be on the best long-term outcome for our country. Tell me how many people you see up there now doing that. So if you want to fix the heritage for our kids, if you don't want them in debtor's prison, then it's time for you to take back the power that's rightly yours. This is about restorative power. It's not about change. It's about restoring the Commerce Clause, which allows the federal government to tell you 60% of what you do by a federal bureaucrat that was never elected to anything. You have the opportunity to restore our country and to create a future much like we've been blessed with. Please do that. And don't let fear be your guide. The thing that we should fear is the runaway federal government that we have today, not the efforts to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Kidwell.
From here? Or do you want me to go?
I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with the bill sponsor in that, yes, we are in a scary situation, but honestly what scares me more is losing my God-given rights that the Constitution guarantees me. The states, you say, have lost their power. They did lose their power with the 17th Amendment because we lost the representation of the state body in federal government. To engage in an Article 5 constitutional convention is opening Pandora's box. Contrary to the belief that you can restrict the rules, the first action of any convention is to write these rules, leaving us in a position that we will have our rights put into the hands of a very few people. At this time, a convention of states would not be in our best interest. I don't know what makes people think that a government that will not act according to the current Constitution would act according to any amendments that we place upon them. Why would an elected official that do not currently abide by the Constitution abide by any new constitutional amendments? The power to rein in the federal government is already in place in the U.S. Constitution. The purpose of the Constitution is to limit the scope and authority of the federal government. The 10th Amendment states, and I quote, "The power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people, end quote. The only power our government has is the power that we, the people, grant them. This is a clear instruction, as clear of an instruction as it can be. The problem is that the people we elect go to Washington to represent us are not abiding by the limits in the Constitution. In many cases, because they're not familiar with those limits. They have no understanding because they have either not read the Constitution at all, or in a very long time, or simply choose not to abide by it. The problem of government overreach cannot be solved by amendments because you cannot write an amendment prohibiting the exercise of authority that the Constitution already prohibits. There is no Constitution of states mentioned in the Constitution. It's from the imagination of the writers of a book outlining what they believe would be the ideal way to progress with an Article 5 convention. But the ideas are neither constitutional nor practical. A balanced budget amendment would simply result in Congress raising taxes to balance the budget. That's what they would end up doing. President Reagan said, we don't have a taxing problem, we have a spending problem. That's what we need to address. In Federalist 40, paragraph 15, James Madison invokes the delegates, quote, transcend and precious right, close quote, to alter or abolish the form of government as recognized in the Declaration of Independence to justify ignoring their instructions and drafting a new Constitution which created the new government. That is what Madison said, that's what they did. They ignored what they were sent there for. James Madison and Alexander Hamilton were delegates to the Amendments Convention of 1787 and had personal knowledge that the delegates can't be controlled. That's why Madison trembled at the prospect of an Article 5 convention. Hamilton dreaded one, and future Chief Justice John Jay said another convention would run extravagant risks. I cannot support an Article 5 convention at this time because it was designed by our founders to be the last resort in a time we are under a tyrannical government. We are not there, and opening up our Constitution to a multitude of amendments and the likelihood of an erosion of our liberties is not a viable option. Many people have told me, but by not supporting an Article 5 convention, it displays I do not have faith in the states and the people. I answer this by reminding them that these same states and people twice elected a president who willingly signed a bill in the middle of the night that then Speaker of the House told us if we wanted to read the bill, we must pass it first. I'd rather be broke and well-armed than lose my freedom to this convention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Riddell.
Thank you. Just final comments, folks. There is a historical record. Some people choose to ignore it. Some people choose to cherry-pick comments from it. There is a historical record. Our country is not inexperienced in the convention process. The convention is very limited by the language in the call. I appreciate Representative Kidwell's comments. Glad he agrees with me that the states do have a role. I would choose to enact the role in Article 5, Convention of States. Thank you.
Representative Brody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the appropriate time, I would like to make a motion for favorable report.
I believe now is the time.
Divisions?
Okay. Representative Brody moves for approval of the House Joint Resolution. Am I saying that right? Yeah. For a favorable report. Referred to the Rules Committee. All in favor? It's called for division.
It was not sustained.
Oh, okay. Well, then, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
In the chair's opinion, the ayes have it.